Hi guys, and welcome to another podcast from me, myself and mind. And today's guest, you may recognise the name. It's Roël McMahon. We've had her on previously before. She's a certified primal health coach and nutritional therapist. We'll be talking all things addictions and behaviours and the trigger reward system. And we'll be finding out once you become fully aware and conscious of these behaviours, you can make changes in your life. And we really hope you enjoy this podcast. Hi, Roël. Welcome back. It's great to see you again. Me and Dan were just talking, we're saying we've heard you've been really busy with your business. Could you elaborate a little bit on what you've been doing?
Yes, hi, and thanks for having me back. Business picked up in the last couple of weeks. At the beginning of the lockdown, I think everyone was sort of a bit in shell shock about what was going on. And I didn't really go out there and market a lot because I felt a little bit uncomfortable, and I wanted people to sort of, get their head around what happened without me then also, telling them that they should get their health act together when the whole rest of their life was falling apart around them. So left it for a bit, worked on some content, refined my programs, and but in the last couple of weeks, when it sort of feels like we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, which hopefully are not the headlights of an oncoming truck, which I'm sort of beginning to worry about a little bit now with all the reports in the newspapers about layoffs. But that's a subject for another podcast, I think.
Leave that out.
Yeah, so back to the light at the end of the tunnel, which we're going to assume that it is. Have been really connecting with people who have felt that in the last few months that their health, both physically and mentally, just wasn't as good as it could be. And I think this pandemic has showed them that the effects of that are actually potentially really serious. And before, I think people know when they're overweight or when they could be fitter and sort of joke about it every now and then or make an effort to do something. But I think just the seriousness of seeing how much more people with underlying health conditions like obesity, like pre-diabetes, how they've been really badly affected. I think that scared a lot of people into action. And obviously, I don't want people to be scared. But on the other hand, sometimes it takes a little bit of a scare to get people to take action. And so that's what I've been seeing, people making a conscious effort to get fitter and improve on their immune system.
And sometimes it is that, we have to feel a little bit uncertain or scared to even go into making change. We've
got to be shocked a little bit.
It's not the easiest thing to start making big changes within your life, within your diet, and to start taking accountability for yourself. But it's definitely what's needed for us all sometimes.
Yeah, and I think this has been a sort of all-round really good time for that, not just on the health front. So I think people are in that sort of frame of mind where they know that their life has changed and they're reassessing all areas of their life, have to reassess their work life, where they work, what they do, maybe even reassess whether they like what they're doing, whether they should make changes. So I think, people are in that place now where they are looking to make changes across the board, which I think is always exciting. I quite like change. I think it's stimulating.
Yeah.
It's probably the positive that's come out of this situation, isn't it? It's almost like the COVID has been a barometer for everybody's lives. Different areas that probably need to change. And as you were saying, we've been shocked into this sort of self-reflection. Is it good how we have been behaving? And maybe it's time to make a change about personal development.
Yeah, and then you come out better at the other end.
Yeah.
Definitely. And moving on, this podcast is a good one for me in a way, because I feel like I relate to a lot of the topics that we're going to be discussing. We're going to be talking about habitual and addictive behaviours and looking into the trigger reward system. Would you say that most of us have some kind of repetitive or addictive behaviours that we might not even be aware of.
Yes, I would, and I think a lot of people are sort of ready to acknowledge at least that. I don't think many people are ready to acknowledge an addiction, but I think a lot of people will recognise that they do have that sort of habitual behaviour.
Mm-hmm.
I think the crucial point here is whether that behaviour has any negative consequences and whether you are in control of it. So I think when it gets to the point that you're not totally in control of it, and it's starting to have some negative effects on either your health or your relationships, your life, your work life, then I think it's time to have a look at it and see if you can do something about it. And not all habitual behaviour has to be bad. I think there's a lot of examples of stuff that people do that it's not necessarily that bad, and they can just keep on doing it if it makes them happy.
Yeah. Do you feel like we, as humans, naturally do fall into habitual patterns of behaviour?
Yes, I do think so. I think that is a thing that most people will recognise as well, that they do like habits, and I think it's also shown in most literature and courses on success. If you read, books, and I mean, you've read loads of them yourselves between you. That is a very reoccurring theme of people who are successful in life. They often have habits, and you only have to go on YouTube and you can find out, 10 habits of the most successful people, 5 things that every successful people do in the morning when they wake up, and that is, that is a thing, because consistency is part of that behavior. Yeah. And it can also nearly sometimes become, habit sounds potentially a little bit negative, because it's like, he's got a habit, nearly sounds like, you're on crack cocaine. Yeah. But you could also, some habits you could also look at as rituals, which all of a sudden make it sound much more worthy and interesting, doesn't it? When you and I nearly, I feel that with, like, even when I take my supplements in the morning, and I, I take quite a few, because I'm in that sort of in that line of work, and there's a lot of stuff that I just want to experiment with, or just know the benefits of. And you could think, oh God, every morning I sort of boil a bit of water and then top it up with cold water. So I've got lukewarm water. Then I add some lemon essential oil, because it's good for the digestive system, and I'll take these supplements. And you think, Jesus, what a faff every morning to do that. But I now see that more as a ritual. As when I do it, I think about the benefits of it, what it does to me, how it makes me feel. Yeah. And suddenly it becomes, a pleasant experience, rather than a chore, if you see what I mean.
So I suppose it's looking at the habit or the ritual, is distinguishing whether it's bringing something positive to your life, or whether it's taking something away, or being maybe negative.
Yeah, so that is mainly the distinction between habit and addiction, is that negative element. And of course, the 3 sort of elements of addictive behavior, which is that sort of initial craving, or the desire, anticipation, that feeling of really looking forward to it, which is not as great with innocent habits, if you see what I mean. But with an addiction, there would be like a definite sort of anticipation feeling. And then secondly, the binge and the actual intoxication of whatever you're doing, or the binge on whatever you're binging on, or whatever you're doing. Activity could be an activity or a substance. And then lastly, an element of addiction would be withdrawal symptoms. So if you stop doing it, you're going to have withdrawal symptoms, either physically or mentally. And so that would, push you over the edge of it being, not a habit, but more like an addictive habit.
Yeah.
On that note, Roël, would you say that our past experiences actually influence the present, you know, our behaviours and possible addictions from what we've experienced, you know, trauma, learned behaviour, and then the negative and the positive reinforcement of that.
Absolutely. But I think what is also important to see here is that any type of trauma or event could cause an addiction or you know, a bad habit. The crucial factor is not what it was, what the event was, or what the trauma was, but how the person perceived it and how they were or were not able to cope with it. So what's a trauma for me may not be a trauma for you. That is the main thing to remember, is that the way it can cause to addiction is the way that that person coped or didn't cope with it. So, you know, there'd be a very obvious example would be sexual abuse, which in most people's lives would be a trauma. And that's often accompanied with shame and embarrassment. And then you find that people are reluctant to find help and they start to self-medicate, and that can easily lead to addiction. So that's a very simple example. And then another example could be grief of any kind. You know, I mean, if your pet hamster dies, you might fall to pieces, and I may not. But if it does to you, and then you will try and find something that numbs the pain of that grief. So you'll be looking for painkillers, and that could be medication, but it could be a bad habit, or that could be, prescription drugs, and that could then easily lead, if that pain and that grief isn't then dealt with properly and not taken away, or coped with in a way that makes it better forever, but you just keep numbing the pain, then you're just going to need more of that, whatever you're doing, and then it can easily lead to an addiction. And then, I don't know, it could be accidents, you could be a victim of crime, and those type of events are often go together with sort of bad memories. So you could be like reminded of it by seeing something, by smelling something, by hearing something. And again, to block memories, people can also get addicted to activities or substances to stop them remembering. But again, that won't, it's very unlikely that that's going to solve the root issue. And then you come into the area of the reward system in your brain. So once you're on that route, then you need more and more and more to keep producing the same levels of dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter pretty much related to all addictions. So yeah, definitely.
So you're saying that with every individual, obviously we attach a different meaning to our trauma, and then maybe some people may overeat to disassociate from that trauma. Some people may over-exercise. I think the key thing is balance, isn't it? Is trying to get that balance within the lifestyle.
And acknowledge that everyone's different.
And I think that everybody has some kind of trauma to a degree, whether that's those capital T traumas of sexual abuse, or losing somebody you love, grief, or trauma that a lot of us will go through at some point in our life, and something on a smaller scale, but maybe
could be a loss of a job or something.
How we felt from that wasn't dealt with in the correct way, and then we picked up these habitual patterns of behaviour, and then obviously, like you were saying, you start to then crave that dopamine because it fills the void that you have at that point.
Yeah, and I think it's really good that you point out that it could be anything, because when you say trauma, people do tend to think of like accidents and grief, people dying and being sexually abused, but it doesn't have to be like that at all. It could be a remark your mum made when you were 8 years old.
Of course.
And it's just the trick is then to find out, if you really want to solve the issue, you need to somehow work out what it was that triggers that behavior, and that is one of the key elements of coming out of addiction, is to recognize the trigger.
Yeah, definitely.
And I suppose, can we have all kinds of different triggers?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Literally, it could be anything. It could be sounds, smells, things that you see. It could be absolutely something somebody says. It could be absolutely anything. So that makes it quite complicated, especially if there's no obvious trauma. That can be quite tricky. So you'd have to. I would suggest that you keep a diary if you're struggling with that, and so you can start to recognize what it was potentially that was your trigger, and then try to work back at what that could point at.
So is that like every time you feel the urge to do that addictive behaviour, you would note down what it was and how you were feeling?
Yeah, yes, it is. But I would also suggest that if you are going to do this type of diary, that you just do quite a precise diary of everything you do, even before you get triggered, because sometimes it's not easy to think back about what happened. But I would just keep, and it doesn't have to be like a novel where you write it all out, but I would just definitely keep like a very good diary of where you were and what you were doing at any point in time of the day. And then it's easier when you do get triggered to see what happened, rather than go back, if you see what I mean. Wait till you're triggered and then go back and think, oh, where was I? What was I
doing? Yeah. I suppose you can actually, because the mind is so, we have so many thousand thoughts during the day. You can, when you've written specific events down, you can actually sit down and reflect, possible, as you said, the lead up to the trigger. Because as we know, as you're saying about the sense of smell, that's probably one of the quickest ways to trigger a long-term memory.
Yeah. And I mean, a memory, I mean, like, it is a tricky thing, and I see that in people's food diaries as well. Those are the diaries I see most of course, in my line of work. And has actually been shown, if people don't keep those diaries as and when they are eating, and at the end of the day they think back, they might omit things, so don't write down that Kit Kat that they have, and there are other makes of chocolate available, like any crap that they've had, and they wouldn't write it down, and then you would probably think that they did that because they didn't want to write it down and they were worried. But actually what they found is that is that sort of selective memory, where because the way that they feel around eating that kind of food, something happens in your brain where that memory gets erased, and at the end of the day they actually really believe that they did not have that Kit Kat. So that's why it's also, really, it's so complex. That's why it's really important. And addiction, so most of it affects the brain's it's called the prefrontal cortex, and that is the part of the brain that is involved in decision making. So it all becomes very complicated, because once you are addicted, that all gets out of balance, and so it can affect your ability to even recognize that you are addicted. It can affect your decision making around using the substance or doing the activity that you shouldn't be doing.
Do you then start to rationalize, because with the prefrontal cortex, logical decision making, do you start to almost rationalize your own addictive behavior to why it's acceptable?
Can do, yeah. I think it expresses, it can sort of come out in different ways, but that can be one way that people that people deal with it. And once that's out of balance, then it becomes very tricky to
elaborate, I suppose,
by yourself. That's why I think it's really important, if you do face addiction and you want to do something about it. I think it is fair to say that you do need help, and it doesn't have to be some in-house psychiatry treatment, but you need some kind of help to untangle it, because your brain is being affected by the addiction, and so you're not in the best position yourself to see what's what.
So it's almost as if, what we've found with research in our own work is that the unconscious mind we takes over. It's automatic. We self-sabotage, and we justify, and you know, a brilliant example there of actually omitting the Kit Kat or the Mars bar, convincing yourself that you didn't actually eat it, because deep down you want to hold on to that buzz of eating that food. But again, long term, it's going to have negative effects on us, whether it's going to put weight on, it's going to cost us money, you know, through this addiction. And then at the end of the day, you know, we've got to be more conscious, haven't we? More conscious of what we're doing in our daily lifestyle.
Yeah, I think that acknowledgement is really important, because that will help you to take action. And I think there are certain things that you can look at to determine how addicted you are, how bad the addiction is. And one of them is how important that behaviour is to you. And a good way to determine that is to look at by how much you're not doing other things to do that thing. So sometimes you just need to look at it, you know, because the decision-making process is affected. You can still look at a list of things and say, okay, how important is this to me? Have I stopped doing some things because I want to do this, or has it stopped me from doing other things because I'm doing this? And so you become very analytical about it, and that makes it sort of easier. So another thing would be cessation. Could you stop? And that is something that most people, even if they are affected by the addiction, would be able to answer whether or not they could stop, even though, you know, I think some people will argue that they can if they want to. But then think about, like we spoke about, the disruption. How much is it disrupting your life? You know, is it affecting your friendships, your relationships, your physical health? You know, any sort of negative effects. And again, it might be helpful there to talk to people around you as well, and if they're honest enough to tell you. Then it's also, is there that feeling of when you do it or take it, never enough? Is there that never enough feeling, like you could just, you know, there's no break, you just want to keep on. That's also an indication of how serious it is. And then lastly, of course, is reverting. Have you tried to stop it in the past, and how did that go? And obviously you're still addicted, so it didn't work. So, you know, if you had these sort of, if you know that you've tried to stop, but you kept coming back and do it again, and that's also an indication that it's quite serious.
We were looking at the research, famous research, the 5 stages of change, Prochaska and DeClemter years ago, and they were talking about cessation of smoking. And in the middle, you've got 5 stages. You know, got pre-contemplation of changing, contemplation, thinking about the change, taking action, and then finally taking action. But in the middle is a relapse, exactly what you were talking about. Understanding that the expression in the UK is falling off the wagon, you know, sort of going back to that behaviour, but then starting again somewhere along that 5 stages of change, and maybe being able to map that out to realise where you are, you know, to measure it. Because again, if it's unconscious, automatic, we will feel, as you're saying, Roël, and Dan's saying, you'll feel jumbled, you won't feel in control. So maybe you're saying to map it out on a diary, you're getting a little bit more control, you know, conscious control, taking that back. You know, that's probably far easier than just sort of wishing it away. Such.
Or just thinking, I know this is bad for me, and I am going to stop on Monday, I'm going to stop doing it. It's very unlikely that that's going to happen. So I think any tools that you can use, and you may have to try a few, and you know, what works for one doesn't work for somebody else, but definitely try diary, try, you know, that looking at those stages that you just spoke about, see where you are, just analysing it, you know, like you would analyse any problem, and that, I think, will make it likely that you're going to be more successful.
You know, bringing it back to like habits and addictions, I've always had a very sort of compulsive personality. If I do something, I'll then, if I do it twice in a row, I'll then want to do it again and do it again and again, whether that's in my past drinking, whether that was taking drugs, whether that's exercise, whether that's taking coffee. You know, it is a drug, but you know, is that a form of addiction, or have I just got a very like a habitual personality?
Well, personality is one of the causal factors of addiction.
Yeah.
So it's not to say that if you are this type of person, you are definitely going to be addicted, but
Yeah.
it makes you more likely. So genes make up for half the risk of addiction, so quite a lot actually. But personality, I don't know the percentage for it, but it does definitely affect the risk of you getting addicted or not. And it is said that sensation-seeking personalities and impulsive personalities are the ones who are most likely to be addicted.
Yeah, and I suppose that would make sense because, you know, I was diagnosed with OCD.
Oh yeah.
You know, a few years back, and I suppose that compulsive behaviour or that compulsive thinking might go hand in hand with those addictive behaviours or habitual behaviours. Because
yes, it can. Yeah.
You know, I've never been to the point where it's like, if I don't do this now, I'm gonna, you know, I can't go and see my friends or this, that, and the other.
Yeah. So that would be like compulsive disorder. Yeah.
Would you agree though, Roël? Because obviously, you know, I'm working with Dan, and you do grow. You know, you grow out of certain behaviours. You know, as our environment changes. You know, so I think as we go through our life, certain stages, we come through them sometimes without any treatment. You know, that can happen.
Yeah. Oh, we have enormous power to change ourselves, more than most people think, and in every aspect, you know, with regards to our health and also our mental health. And if you get into the field of epigenetics, which talks about how you can, so we cannot change the genes that we have, obviously. I'm not talking about denim genes, I'm talking about your genes, as in your DNA. But we can affect the gene expression, so that you have more genes than you're actually expressing, and which one you're expressing will determine a lot of things, you know, like addiction or like, you know, anything else really, personality, physical aspects. And epigenetics is sort of the science around how our environment and our behavior and external factors, what we do, who we hang out with, what we surround ourselves with, what we eat, can definitely influence gene expression. So we have, you know, this whole thing like, oh, it's in my genes. It is to some extent, like I said, true, because genes do, you know, take up 50% of the risk of getting addicted. But that's not to say that you cannot affect that, because you can affect that gene expression, and that once you know that, that's so powerful that, you know, it'd be really such a shame not to do something with that.
So would you suggest that, you know, we can turn these genes on and off? We're not sort of suggesting that to, you know, we're doctors, but it links to your belief system. So beliefs are that powerful. They actually influence the chemicals within the body, and then that in turn affects our health, you know.
Yeah, we do have to make a small distinction for the physical addiction. So you have physical addiction and psychological addiction, but some chemical substances that you can be addicted to can actually cause some changes that are permanent and cannot be reversed. And you often see that in a physical sense with some people when they've been addicted to drugs or alcohol for a length of time, that their speech is impaired, their movement is impaired, and that is irreversible. But yeah, on the whole, a lot of it is very, very, very reversible. So that's really good to know.
And I suppose, you know, when you say about belief systems, if somebody's still being affected by a trauma, no matter what that is, they believe a certain thing about themselves, and they're continually telling themselves that daily, day in, day out. And I suppose that then just reignites the addiction over and over again. So would you say that those people that are addicted do need to maybe investigate into the trauma and their belief systems about themselves and around that situation?
It's like this.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think there's a way out really without that, unless you chain them to the wall. But I don't think there's yeah, there's not going to be another easy way out. You need to get to the root cause of the issue to tackle it. Yeah.
And that's not easy.
Mm.
And it's
No.
going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of time.
But it's very rewarding, you know, if you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And you come out the other end, then, you know, you've gained so much more than getting rid of your addiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I suppose you've overcome that situation that was still defining you.
Yeah.
You know, and you've become your true self.
Yeah. So it's almost, don't let your, you know, your biography define you. You know, you can change that, your narrative, your story. You know, we have the internal dialogue all of the time, telling us what's true, what's not, what we can do, what we can't. And going back to what you were saying, Roël, that's really interesting about, you know, most people out there are stating that Auntie Jan had cancer, so I'm going to definitely get cancer. But there's been research done where a boy was actually adopted into a family who, a lot of them had cancer, and guess what? He happened to get cancer, you know. So there's a lot of anomalies out there regarding whether it's inherent through the genes or a belief system, but maybe, you know, there's more research.
Yeah, exactly. That goes back to the people you surround yourself with, and obviously, you know, if it's your family, you don't often have that choice, but it just goes to show that, you know, you don't know to what extent that person is overweight or gets cancer because his mom and dad are overweight or have cancer, or the fact that it's just put in his head that everybody's got cancer and everybody's overweight, and it's a self, you know, reinforcing issue.
So say somebody is, I know we mentioned dopamine earlier, but let's just say somebody does have an addictive behaviour, an addiction to something. What is going on within the brain and the body when we do become triggered, or when we're getting that reward from that behaviour?
Yeah, so if we just stick to dopamine, I mean, there are other neurotransmitters as well, but that would, you know, again, be a much longer podcast. But dopamine is involved in nearly every addiction, so that's a good one to work with, and it sort of works the same for the other ones as well. Yeah, what happens is if we take the drugs, or we do the activity, it doesn't have to be a substance, it could be anything, then we produce dopamine, and that's basically is a neurotransmitter, but it's sort of the reward, the pleasure feeling is caused by the dopamine, and so we seek that out. And as humans, we want that feeling. So if you find something that gives you that feeling, and the thing with most drugs is that people are addicted to, it works. We can get it from other nice things as well, but with some chemical substances and some other addictions, the pathway is a bit quicker, so we get that release faster. And so then we get that release and it feels really good, so we then want it again. And so what happens is, as well, your brain has got like a memory, and it then starts to associate certain people, behavior. So this could be the people you're drinking with, or the people you're taking drugs with, where you are when you're doing that. If you're somewhere and it smells the same like that place where you normally do it, then that all these things can become triggers. And so then you start to get the cravings again. And then you get the intoxication, and then you get the reward where the dopamine is released. But the problem is, if you do a lot of that, then you become tolerant. You know, the receptors become insensitive to the dopamine, and then you are likely to take more of the substance or do more of the activity to get that same effect. And the sad thing is as well, that the other things that naturally give you the high, like good food, social interaction, intimacy, exercise, all these things, when you're addicted to a chemical substance, are numbed. So, you know, it's a double whammy. You're just then also not enjoying that stuff anymore. So that then gives you another reason it then reinforces addiction even more. So yeah, that's a very strong loop that you're in then.
it's almost like a narrow focus, isn't it? You can't see anything else. You know, it's like these addiction glasses. That's all you can see.
Yeah.
You're in on that particular substance or environment or smell or whatever it is to get that high, and everything else outside your peripheral vision isn't there. You know, almost like beliefs.
Yeah.
You know, that's, you know, you believe it to be true for you, and that's it. Nothing else counts.
Yeah.
Quite dangerous, you know.
I think I've experienced that a bit, even with coffee.
Yeah.
You know, I noticed that quite easily 1 coffee a day turned into 2, 2 to 3, then 4 to 5, and before you know it, you're having 5 coffees a day, and that's not healthy. But you can easily keep going up and up and up because you're trying to get that buzz. And well, I know within myself, I feel like I have always tried to feel something out of anything that I do, and maybe that was from, you know, not feeling connected when I was younger, and that's maybe had an effect on all of these behavioural patterns that I've built up around that. But yeah, I have to be very aware, because whatever I'm doing, I just go again and again and again and again. I have to just stop that, you know.
We've both agreed, haven't we, with the coffee, because we did a quite a large area on caffeine and the effects on us. So after midday, generally, we don't take any caffeine. We'll have maybe 2 or 3 maximum coffees. As Dan was probably having 6. I was having 5 coffees myself, and that.
And you can really overload the adrenals, and it's going to like affect your.
And you can almost, I mean, with the caffeine, not spending too much time on it, but that is so prolific in society. Coffee is like the new gold, isn't it? It's sort of the new crack cocaine, and if you have too much of it, you know, I even felt in my chest. You felt anxious. You felt a physical sensation, which wasn't because of the coffee.
But again, that's also differs from person to person, because, and that's another factor in whether or not you're likely to be addicted. Could even be liver enzymes that you have, and how well your body processes certain chemicals. And so some people are very sensitive to coffee, and I mean, I can drink $2 espressos before I go to bed, and I, you know, wouldn't know the difference. And my parents had that too. So there is that, you know, that physical genetic thing that plays a role there as well. And the less likely you're able to cope with a substance, the more likely you are to be able to cope with it. The more, you know, the more you can take of it, and you wouldn't notice. So it wouldn't be an addiction, because you wouldn't have the negative effects of it, but you felt the negative effects.
Yeah, definitely. I was, and at the time that I was really abusing coffee and abusing drugs on my body, when I was at university, you know, that was the peak of my OCD anxiety. I mean, not only was I probably feeling anxious because of drugs and alcohol and caffeine, but I was trying to escape my own mind and my own thoughts.
Yeah.
When I did that, I'd feel something and get a buzz and get away from it.
But that's quite typical. But what's really important there is that you obviously have an insight in the cause of it, from the way you're talking about it, and once you and what your triggers were, and once you know that, then you could just, there's very little that you can do about avoiding those triggers, because they're all around us. So it's really difficult. So what is important is that you change the behavior. So leave the triggers what they are, because those smells, those people, whatever, that, you know, there's always a risk that they're going to be there. But there are other things that you could have done that would have made you feel something, and that could have been like, you know, rock climbing, or, you know, and it might be for some people who are, you know, looking for that sort of adrenaline rush. You know, it could be for some people, they could be knitting and crocheting. I get a sense that wouldn't be your thing, but it could be, you know, you have to sort of do some research and find out what would excite you, what would give you the same rush or the same feeling or excitement or passion or whatever it is that you're looking for, but that doesn't involve bad chemicals or bad habits. And once you do that, then you know that, okay, I'm triggered. I feel like, you know, taking drugs or a drink or doing something, but then you have your little list of stuff that you can do first, and then you get yourself, and then you still get that same reward, because those activities will then produce, the same neurotransmitters as they would if you were doing, the bad thing. And then that gets you out of, you still get the trigger, you're still doing something, and you still get the reward, and that's a good way to get out of it.
So is what you're saying there that once you've got that sort of addictive behaviour, you kind of have to replace the addiction? Is there no way of like eradicating that, or is it you have to replace?
It's really difficult, because like I said, it's the only other way that I can think of would be to get rid of all the triggers. If there's one thing that triggers you and you can get rid of that, maybe.
Yeah.
But I still get a feeling that there's going to be another trigger then. I think people who have an addiction will recognise that it's hardly ever the case that there's one thing that will make you do that thing. So I think it's better if you can come up with some alternatives.
So on that note, really interesting, you're saying that there's a vacuum left, isn't there? So we've got to fill the vacuum that's with other behaviours to
because also if you don't replace it with something, then you're not gonna get those neurotransmitters that give you the reward feeling. Then you just have nothing. So then you may not have an addiction, but then you haven't got that good feeling either. So I don't think you want to take that away.
Well, it's been an absolutely fantastic podcast, Roël.
Yeah.
I'm sure the listeners learned.
Complex issue, but it is. You see, it's so prevalent, and like you said at the beginning of the podcast, I think we can all admit that we have habits that we would be better off without.
Okay. So it's been fantastic, as Dominic said, but could you leave the listeners with 3 of your top tips on almost breaking a behaviour or an addiction, whether that's noting it down, becoming aware? What would you say is the best intervention to leave the listeners? Yeah,
I would say, even though a lot of people will be ashamed, embarrassed and proud, but I would say don't go it alone. Even if you just have to involve one person close to you to just give you that sort of honest feedback that you need, and to give, you need somebody else to help you. And or if you don't want to involve people that then go and seek professional help. There's less and less stigma around that. Nobody even needs to know. So I do think that's worthwhile. Yeah. And then secondly, I would say keep a diary. Definitely, like I said, it doesn't have to be a novel, but just bullet points all day long. Do it on your phone, so you've got it. You don't have to have, I didn't have my notebook, so I have to do it later. No, do it now, because especially if you're addicted, you're going to have selective memory or impaired memory. And so throughout the day, just a quick note: where you are, what you're doing, where you are, what you're doing, where you are, what you're doing. And then when you get a trigger, put it there. Then, after a while, you can just look at it and go back and say, that's where I got triggered. And that will help you to find out what your triggers are. And that in turn can help you, if you don't know what it is that's causing your addiction, then that will help you on the way to finding out. And so that will make it better. Yeah. And then lastly, I would say, keep the trigger, keep the reward, change the habit.
Fantastic, brilliant. Thank you for coming back on the podcast. Yeah.
Oh, it was a joy. Thank you.
I'm sure we'll see you again soon.
Great. Take care.
Thanks, Roël.
Cheers. Thank you.